Right, let's go for this. We are live. And I've just realised that I had my microphone turned on. So you heard me say, right, let's go for this. And that's really professional start. Hello, it's William Mankelo, as always. I'm in a new location. Before I reveal that location, hopefully this is all working well. I just did a test stream and it was absolutely fine. Absolutely brilliant. But remember to like, share, comment whilst we go through this. There's a photograph that I took at Hinksey Railway Yard about 5 years ago. I've updated my screen, but I'm going to get myself on the screen. Hello, good afternoon. And my backpack is there. It's a bit weird when you're sort of trying to do it in mirror. There's my backpack just there. I've just realised my backpack's in the way. I'm going to move my backpack because that's going to annoy me. I've got a new location. Yes, I'm here. I'm in the chalet. I should really write a story about how I found this location. It's just purely by serendipity or chance, or whatever you want to call it. This is the Shot at an Angle show here on Facebook that I do every week. I'm here every week. I've got 3 people watching me. Put your thanks very much for watching me. Thanks for checking in. Right where you're watching, type where you're watching right now and put it in the comment. And while you're watching, I've got 5 shares. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm going to be talking about the exposure triangle today. I'm going to be sharing some photographs with you as I go through that exposure triangle. If you can hear me clicking away, it's because I've well, this isn't quality information. Yeah, I did find it by destiny. Stuart, as you're watching, is the stream quality okay here? It might actually be better than when I'm at home because I'm through a cabled connection, and we did some behind the scenes technical stuff today. Yay, Dee's here. Woo! Hello. Sunny Headington. Well, I'm sort of in sunny, sort of Cowley-ish. Thanks everybody for watching me. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. But just, could you just say yes or no? Oh, Stuart said it's perfect. Wow. Yeah, the stream is perfect, but maybe not me. I'm maybe not the most perfect. So, yeah, I'm here every week. It's a creative show. Can be sometimes be quite eclectic, a bit of fun, you know, and but it's a place of understanding. So if you want to ask me a question, I will answer it to the best of my ability. And about photography, of course, you know, not just life in general. Thanks, Dee. Thanks for telling me that it's perfect. Superb. Right. What do you think of the background? What do you think of the new background? Tell me. Out of 10. Anyway, yes, it feels good to be in a new location. I've got my light over here. I've got my laptop in front of me. It's all working well. I've got my water bottle here. You know, it's all coming up. All coming up me. Anyway, today's topic, I'm going to be specifically talking about understanding the exposure triangle. No, there's nothing to do with the Bermuda Triangle. Yeah, it is a jazzy background, Stuart. Yes, very good. The records are definitely jazz in this establishment. I'm not going to say any more than that. But yes, understanding the exposure triangle and what it is and how it helps you as a photographer to understand that. No, Mother, I have not read all those books. My mum's watching this. No, I haven't read any of those books. I can't read. You should know that by now. Yes. Stop waylaying me with messages. I appreciate them and comments, but I really need to concentrate. Understanding the exposure triangle is what I'm going to be talking about in today's show. So what is the exposure triangle and why is it important to understand it as a photographer? Well, really, it's the best way to get the best out of your camera. It's the best. Understanding it means you'll get the best out of the equipment that you've got. So there's 3 parts to the exposure triangle because, well, if it was 4, it'd be called the exposure square, of course, wouldn't it? So the 3 parts are, in no particular order, there is shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Now, I will give you some. So this is today's topic. So I'm such a professional. I'm not even using my own graphics. I can just get along without the visual prompts. So you can kind of see in the background there, so you've got the ISO down one side, shutter speed down the other side, and aperture down the other side. And it's the whole idea of being able to use all 3 of those controls together. But let's just have a quick walk through of exactly what the shutter speed does and what aperture does and what ISO does. So shutter speed is really just how quickly the speed that your shutter opens and closes. It can be from anything from 80 thousandths a second, 1/8,000th of a second to up to like forever. Then there's the aperture, which is how wide wide your shutter opens, and the ISO is how light sensitive your sensor, or back in the day, or if you're still using film, how light sensitive your film is. So we'll start with shutter speed, and I'll give you some examples exactly what I'm talking about here. So to begin with, there's a picture here, and I hope this will work, of what is a fast shutter speed. Now, I took these photographs back a few years ago, actually. I was visiting the city of Coventry. In fact, you can see the cathedral, part of the old cathedral in the background, which was it's quite an interesting place to go to. But we're not talking about Coventry today, but that's where I took this photograph. And this was taken at 1/8,000th of a second. So the shutter opened and closed in that fast speed. That's faster than you can blink, pretty much. But what it does is it freeze frames absolutely everything in the shot. As you can see, this is really this is just a there was like a plaza. They were in this square. There were like these small fountains, and it was a really lovely sunny day. So I wanted to get the shutter speed as fast as possible to freeze frame these fountains. I couldn't think of the word there. And it kind of gives this sort of like a little otherworldly feel to it, because it doesn't look like water in a way, does it? It almost looks like ice, because of course it's frozen water, William. So it would look like ice. So that's what the fast shutter speed will do for you. It will give you this sort of freeze frame for you. Then we have the slow shutter speed, the other end. So this was a shot that I took in Oxford down Magpie Lane. I had my camera on a tripod because it's a long shutter speed. You need to have your camera as steady as possible. So my shutter was open for 30 seconds here, and somebody actually cycled that light you can see there is the front light of a bike, because it's such a bright light. That's what will be picked up on a long shutter speed. But it also gives you that sense of movement. I think there's also, if you look a little bit at the top towards the lamp, at the top of the photograph here, I think they may have even been wearing a helmet. It was taken about 6 or 7 years ago now, this photograph was, but it gives you an idea. So let me go back to the fast shutter speed one. So this is the fast shutter speed, freezes everything in place, and the slow shutter speed is, it brings in movement. Now the playoff there, the playoff there is that the faster shutter speed you have, the less light you're getting into the camera. And the slower the shutter speed, the more light you'll get in the camera. But of course, with the fast shutter speed, there's no camera shake at all, because no matter how hard, if you're hand holding your camera, if it's a really fast shutter speed, you won't see any handshake. Whereas with the slow shutter speed, you really need it on a tripod. You can't hold it. That's the playoff for that one. But let's go to the next one. So we've got shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. So the next one I'll talk about is aperture. And this is a wide aperture. Now, what do I mean by a wide aperture? So when you take a photograph and the shutter opens, it will open a certain width. I believe the F is fenestra. I think it's a Latin word. That's where it comes from. So it's called you can hear aperture being called an F stop or an F number. So the smaller the number, the wider the aperture. So this photograph, which I took of a musician called Chris Ryder, you can quite see it brings out. It has what's called a shallow depth of field. So a depth of field is what's in focus in the photograph, and you can use it to quite an artistic degree. Wider the aperture, the more narrow the depth of field is. So the people in the foreground here are very much out of focus, because I wanted them to be, because the subject was the person performing, not the people in the foreground. The thing that it also does, because it's a wider aperture, it allows more light in. So they were talking about, again, this push and pull and play between the different things. So you could actually have a faster shutter speed, but with a wider aperture. But the sacrifices, you're going to get less in focus. The other end of the spectrum is a wide aperture. Now, I took this about 12 years ago. This is at a place called Hebden Bridge. This was an f/22 shot. It was a reasonably good light, as you can see, but everything in that photograph is in focus. I mean, the quality is not the greatest because it's not wasn't the highest resolution camera, but you can kind of demonstrate that even in the foreground here and the background, everything is pretty much in focus. Now the playoff here is that because you're doing a narrow aperture, because it's smaller, there's less light coming through, so you have to have better lighting conditions. I hope you're getting into some idea of how this is working, you know, that you're actually able to play these off against each other. The last one is the ISO, and before I go on to the ISO, I'm just going to quickly check any comments. Yes, Stuart. Yeah, Magpie Lane. Where was that? Was that where it was? Because he went to Bill Clinton went to University College, I think, because I think that's where Chelsea went as well. I've got a fun fact about Magpie Lane, but yeah, I just wanted to check the comments. So yeah, the third one out of the triangle, and what I'm talking about today is the exposure triangle and how useful it is for photography. So we've got the fast shutter speed, we've got the slow shutter speed, so it gives you an idea of the difference between those two. We've got the wide aperture, we've got the narrow aperture. It gives you an idea of what the difference between those two is. And now the last one is ISO. Now, before I carry on with this one, each camera has its own unique quirks and its own characteristics. All these were taken on Canon, by the way. Different cameras. I've had 3 different Canon cameras. It's just what I'm used to, and I really enjoy using them. But just to give you an idea, but these are the real standard. These are the real standard, the way of thinking about, especially about the exposure triangle. So this shot was taken very early in the morning on a sleeper train up to Scotland. I think it was like probably about 4 o'clock in the morning during the summer. Actually, probably a bit later, actually. So it was just about getting light. It was not this light. And I knew that I needed to get this. We're getting into the nitty gritty of this exposure triangle. So what I needed here was just to do, I didn't need the highest quality photograph that I ever wanted. I just wanted to capture this moment, and especially because I stuck my head out the window and I could see this reflection, and I just love the reflection here. So I knew that I was shooting from hand, so I needed to keep my shutter speed up to a reasonable level. I mean, 1 in 100th is ideal. You can sometimes get away with 1 in 30th, especially if your hands are quite steady, but I knew that I needed to keep my shutter speed up. So to keep my shutter speed up, I needed to make some sacrifices in other parts, and this one was the ISO. 6400 ISO is really quite, it's really quite a high ISO. And if you look at that photograph, it's quite grainy, and that's what you get with this. So in digital terms, it's now called noise. So you can see there's a little bit of like pixelation there. It's called noise in digital photography. In film photography, it's known as grain, and there are similarities. The reason why you get this sort of effect, and you can actually use this effect to your own your ability, your best, your artistic ideas. You can use it in your artistic ideas, but that's the high ISO. If we go then to the other end, this is a 100 shot ISO 100. So this was taken on Cowley Road, and it was a beautifully sunny day, and I took this shot just as this isn't the best photograph I've ever taken, but I just wanted to use this idea. So if you go back to the previous one, we've got the high ISO, very grainy. We've got the low ISO, which is very clear. So there's a playoff here. That's really what we're looking at. You have to evaluate every condition, every situation that you face. So say you were to have a low light conditions is one of the good examples. Let me just get my thing on screen. I want to keep an eye on the comments. So say you've got a low light situation, you want to slow down your shutter speed, or you might want to widen the aperture, or you might want to increase the ISO, because really, I mean, when you photograph, light is important. You really need to know where the light is in the image you're taking, what's the quality of that light, what's the strength of that light, what's the contrast in your photo, what's the contrast in that image. There's lots of different things that go through your mind when you're taking a photograph, and every time you take a photograph, it's good to have these in your head. And it can appear to be quite daunting to begin with, but it's like anything. If you exercise this idea over and over and over again, you begin to get an understanding of how it works. If you just wait until the end of this bit, I'm going to just quickly talk about how we could work together as well, with some one-to-one tuition. But yes, so just recap, if anybody's actually just popped onto the stream right now, I'm talking through the understanding the exposure triangle, and I'm just this moment going through the whole idea of how you can balance things off with each other. So say you're in a situation that you're in a low, the light isn't brilliant, like I had the photograph. I'm going to go back and just put the photograph up on the screen, which is this one here. I think this is probably my favourite example. So in this situation, I knew that my goal for this photograph, so when I was planning it, and this whole idea of planning it, plan, shoot, review, go through that 3-step process every time, plan, shoot, review. Even if your plan takes you a millisecond, you're still thinking about what you're about to photograph. And the more you plan, the more you shoot, the more you review. Again, you're building up a confidence with your camera, and you're building up experience and knowledge of how photography works. So the first part of that is, so I was planning it, and I just wanted this photograph to capture this moment where basically what's happening here is this is a very, very, very long sleeper train at this place, which is a place called Carstairs, which is in just south of Glasgow. The train separates into two. One half goes to Edinburgh, the other half, the one I was in, goes onto Glasgow. So what I wanted to do here was capture that moment, but I knew it was going to be a low light situation. So what I did was, because I was holding it the camera in my hand, which I referred to earlier, what I did was I made sure that my shutter speed was a reasonable speed to minimize any shake of my hands, because it doesn't matter, even when I'm leaning against something, you always got a bit of shake in your hands. It's just natural. You don't realize it until, I mean, if you can hold your hand in front of you steady, it's actually, I've got relatively steady hands, but even me, I have to make sure that my shutter speed in this situation was pretty fast. So I probably set this at roughly about 1/80th to 100th of a second. But of course, that shutter speed was too fast for this situation. It was not going to give me enough light into my camera to actually get a proper exposure. So what I had to do was change one of the other settings, because I knew that I had to fix my shutter speed. And I also wanted to get a lot of what was in this shot in focus. So I know I needed a relatively narrow aperture. Now I don't actually have the aperture details, which would have been a really good idea. In fact, as I'm looking at this now, if you can just bear with me, I can find what the aperture of this photograph was, or at least have a go. I'm going off piece here a little bit. No, it's not. I can't find it, but it's going to be somewhere in the realms of probably at least f5.6, maybe narrower. Could have been f8, but again, that would have reduced the light coming into the camera. So the only control that I could use in this situation to get the exposure that I wanted was to increase the ISO, and that's where I've hit upon the ISO 6400, because I knew it wasn't going to be a great quality photograph. I remember vividly, it was quite a cold morning as well, so I didn't want to hang around. as I had my head out the window. I knew that I needed to take this relatively fast, and I knew that I just wanted to capture the moment. So that's how I used the exposure triangle. I knew that I wanted to keep the shutter speed a reasonable speed, and I knew that I wanted to get a lot of the actual training shot as well. So it's specifically useful in low levels conditions, but it's useful in every condition. So let's go back also to the fast shutter speed. What were my considerations in this photograph, for example? Now, my idea here, my plan was to freeze these fountains, because I wanted to see how it would look. You know, you don't see these shapes at all because they're moving so fast that, yeah, you just don't see what it looks like, what shapes it's creating. This was the same, as you can see by the background. This was the same fountain, and taken in a rapid succession as well. So my considerations here were I wanted to get the freeze frame the photo, or freeze frame the water. So I set my shutter speed to 1/8,000th of a second. Again, this is all based around shutter speed, but it was a bit of an easier one to do because the light was so much better than in the previous photograph. So if I go back to this previous one, go back to this one, this was very early in the morning, it was quite dark, whereas here we're in bright sunshine, and I knew that I wanted to have that in focus. The other thing that worked for me here, because it was such a sunny day, you can see it's blue sky in the background, I wanted to be able to just get I keep forgetting the word, the fountain, thank you very much brain, the fountain in focus. So I also could widen my aperture up as well, so I was getting a lot more light in. Because I was getting so much more light in, I was able to shoot this at 100 ISO as well. So it's the highest quality, it's the fastest speed. In fact, when the light is better, more uniform like it is here, you don't have to push and pull so much. Now, the one thing I could have done here is I could have actually, so I've exposed for the actual fountain itself. I've got the word right first time. But another thing I could have done is I could have maybe increased the aperture or narrowed the aperture. So maybe I would have got a bit more of a background in as well. It would have made the photograph a little bit more darker, so it really would have highlighted the fountain. But yeah, that's some idea of what the exposure triangle actually is. It's this whole idea of being able to use these three settings, and these are the three most important, for me at least as a photographer, the three most important controls when it comes to photography, and being able to work them off each other. You can use, and we are specifically talking, and like I said, I'll just recap if you've just come on now, I'm just talking about understanding the exposure triangle within photography. You can, of course, this is all you're really thinking about using the manual mode of your camera. If you were to use shutter priority or aperture priority, of course, it does a lot of the work for you. In fact, those two settings, so aperture priority is where you set what your aperture is, and the camera will work out the shutter speed. And if you can actually put your ISO on automatic, so your camera just does everything else for you. And the same for shutter priority, you can do the same. I always think that they're very useful in certain situations, but manual is the best way to go because you've got all this control. It feels like you can sometimes have too much. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today. What did you think about my new setting? Is anybody else watching? I've got a thumbs up. Thanks very much. Who did that? Thank you. Yes. And I've got another share. Thank you very much. So like and share this video. It will help me immensely, and I want to get to a sort of like a wider audience. And also notice that I'm getting towards the end of my show as well. I've done a show for the last well over a year now, and it's sort of changed. It started on a Monday, it's now on a Wednesday because it just makes more sense. So, and I talk about a specific topic every week. Now, this show, Stuart's going to say I've nicked an idea off of him here. This show is free to do, or it's free to watch for you, but it's not free for me to do. It takes me time to look at the subject, think about the subject, do a bit of research, and also just to sort of put the show together. So you can support me today on a monthly basis if you want to, or if you don't want to, as a one-off basis by buying me a coffee. Now, is this going to work? It sometimes doesn't, and this time it has worked. So yes, buy me a coffee. Go check it out. It says here, if you buy me a coffee, and I know that Richard's bought me a coffee recently, so he lives in Oxford, so I'm going to see if I can meet up with him. If you buy me a coffee and we get to meet face to face, I'll buy you a real coffee or a drink of your choice, because not everybody likes coffee, which, you know, that's fair enough. But that's nearly it. For all you photographers out there, I'm just going to do a couple more things and my show will be done. It's nearly 7:30, so I will finish this show relatively quickly because I like to keep this under usually 20 minutes, but it's been a big subject today. So I'll set the challenge again. Anybody who's a photographer, one lens challenge. So next time you head out, just take one lens with you and see what photographs you get. I went to London at the weekend. I only had my 50mm lens on me and I got some really great photographs. Go out there and really challenge yourself as a photographer. Don't rely on zoom lenses. If you've got a prime lens, just take one prime lens with you. You can cope without your zoom lens. You can sometimes use it as a bit of a crutch, I find. So that's it. Next week's show. I'll go quickly talk about next week's show. We're here every week. We, as in me, you know, my multiple personalities. Next week's going to be talking about how to use natural light in your photography. So we're going to build upon the exposure triangle, and we're going to talk about how to use light, natural light in photography, and how you may be able to bounce it around, or all those beautiful things you can do with photography. Thank you very much for watching. I shall see you next week. Next week is going to be the first show in August. It's going to be the 4th of August, if you can believe that. We're actually already in August. 2021 seems to be going quite rapidly for me. But hey, here we are. Thanks very much for watching, and thanks very much for Gil and Gavin for letting me use this place. And this is going to be my new studio for my live show. Thanks very much for watching. I shall see you next week, and like I said, next week's show is how to use natural light in your photography, and that's us done.